Afterwards.
Shall we start?
Yes.
Welcome to this webinar hosted by Relational Peacebuilding Initiatives. My name is Paul Mills. I'm chairman of the trustees. Going to have a presentation shortly by Jeremy Ive, who's worked particularly on peace ideas for both Russia, Ukraine, and North and South Korea. Then we're going to briefly address questions that have already been sent by Young Gil Lee. Thank you very much. Just framing sort of the question and answer session. And then we'll open it up more broadly. I think Jeremy's going to aim to speak for about 25 minutes. The questions that he, I, and I think Michael Schluter will try and answer will then take 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up wider. It would be helpful if you put questions in the chat function so that as they arise, so that we can address those afterwards. Welcome again to both Korean supporters who are in a few hours ahead of us in the UK, and to those in the UK. Welcome. I'll hand it over now to Jeremy, who'll speak on Korea and Ukraine. Is peace possible? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Do we mention that it's being recorded for people's information? And that will be available after the session. Well, today we're looking at the whole issue of mutual convergent development as the key to peace in Korea and Ukraine. This is something we've been working on for quite some time with respect to Korea, and also in a parallel way with Ukraine. On the 24th of February 2022, everything changed with the Russians, as what they called it, a special military operation into Ukraine, with tens of thousands have been killed over the last few years on both sides. The world has been divided, and it's also exacerbated the situation, I think, on the Korean Peninsula. I'd be interested to hear your reflections on that. But certainly with North Korea being closely then drawn into the Russian military endeavor, and South Korea, of course, being very much linked to the Western alliance, that's caused a deepening of the divide between North and South Korea. In Korea, there was an armistice, of course, in 1953. And ever since then, you've got the DMZ between the North and South Korea. In Ukraine, the war continues, and although over the last few months there's been a lot of backwards and forwards about whether there can be a ceasefire, that has not yet been achieved. And there's a difference of sequencing of the demands from the Russian side and the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainian side are now agreeing to a 30-day ceasefire. The Russians want the wider peace to be dealt with first. And so things are not resolved. But I think the feeling is that this can continue for a great deal longer, because the strain on the economies of both countries is such that there has to be peace eventually, or at least an armistice. An armistice being the ending of actual fighting, but itself is not enough, because from the side of Ukraine, they want their territories back. From the side of Russia, they still see Ukraine as a dagger pointed at the heart of Russia, at Moscow itself. By the West, they see it as part of a deeper problem. These are unresolved. But what we as relational peace-building initiatives can offer is a track 2 process, which, as it were, sidesteps these issues and seeks to build confidence, should there be a ceasefire, across those divides, which could then make it possible, as we've been working in Korea. So hopefully there'll be an armistice in Ukraine, as there is currently an armistice across the Korean Peninsula. Now, what hope is there for a future? An armistice is not the end of the story, of course. It still leaves the unresolved issues between the different sides in the conflict. We've been involved as RPI or in our predecessor organizations in South Africa, Rwanda, and Sudan. In South Africa, we dealt with the bringing together of the then white establishment with the African National Congress, but behind the scenes, really providing the building blocks for a future peace in then South Africa. And then further in Rwanda, after the horrific genocide of 1994, and in Sudan from 1999, with the civil war between North and South Sudan, but also all the conflicts in the different regions, culminating in a peace, or rather a armistice in 2002, and then finally peace settlements in 2005. So we've been involved in these different conflicts, and we've developed this track 2 methodology, which I've dealt with in previous seminars, both on the South Africa experience as well as Sudan. And you can find that if you go to our website, looking under the history section for what we've done there. Moving forward, we've found in our experience there are 3 necessary foundations for building trust. First of all is mutual knowledge. Second is mutual respect. And then third is values and goals alignment. So I'll deal with each of those in turn. First of all, we deal with mutual knowledge. What mutual knowledge requires are face-to-face meetings, which drives what empathy, that in other words, the ability to sense and understand where others are coming from, others who may be very different from ourselves or from the particular side of the conflict. And then allowing a safe space where people can talk together openly and provide that level of continuity which builds that trust. So we're working within our relational principles, the 5 relational principles which we identified, which build relationships and make relationships, successful relationships possible. Secondly, there's mutual respect, perceptions of fairness by both sides. There needs to be a sense that one side isn't, as it were, trying to take advantage of the other, and that all can participate in the decisions which are being made. And it also looks at the different networks involved and provides that continuity of working together, which is essential for a peace to be built. And then finally, the values and goals alignment, vital in complex societies. A society cannot exist without the foundation and framework of values, which all hold in broad terms. And this becomes especially the case in complex societies where organizations need to operate within an agreed set of objectives which hold all together. And indeed, this is implicit in all models of economic growth and welfare, because in order to project forward plans for the future, there has to be an understanding of what is the right way to behave. Now, obviously, in situations of conflict, all of these things go out the window. It's a question of rebuilding them from the ground up. So how do we get there? Especially in cases of extreme conflict. We need a roadmap, we suggest, setting out a trust-building process to lay the foundations for a peaceful outcome. So first of all, and then we've in RPI have developed this idea of a mutual convergent development process, building on that idea, those principles of mutual knowledge, mutual respect, and values and goals alignment. Finding ways to work together to bring two sections of a country at war or conflict together through shared values, institutions, and policy goals, step by step towards a shared future. Now, in the case of the Korean Peninsula, as I mentioned, there's a de facto partition. First of all, in 1945, of course, with the West occupying the southern half of the peninsula and Russia the north. And then it was redrawn after the horrific the Korean War, which you could say was a sort of civil war, ending in 1953. So that has left a legacy, which of course Koreans have had to live with and find ways forward. And it's had the wider implication on the geopolitics of the region, Japan, Russia, and China as the key neighbors there. Now, what we're suggesting is that there's a historical precedent for working together, and this is something which developed after the end of the Second World War. And when the two figures, the French foreign minister at the time, whose name was Robert Schuman, and the German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, developed a relationship with one another, the two previous countries at war seeking to build a way forward for peace. And what they identified was the coal and steel community between the two countries in the Ruhr Valley. Now, there was a way of building a single market for the free flow of coal and steel goods between the member countries without custom duties. And by integrating the economic independence of the member states in this way, it was hoped that no country would jeopardize their own interests by going to war with one another. In other words, trying to build a win-win situation. And then 4 other countries joined France and Germany, France and Germany, namely Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And part of this idea was that there be a high authority for that community, which would make sure it was working across those divides. So we were trying to think about how it would work in the case of Korea. Now, I hope you're familiar with the book which we produced, No Other Way to Peace in Korea. You'll find this on our website. There's also a South Korean version in electronic form, as well as in the North Korean dialect. Both have got their versions of it. Now, what we did was we identified a way forward, not with coal and steel in the case of Korea, but with agriculture, finding a community for the agricultural sector, for the exchange of agricultural goods, so that different goods which were appropriate to trade through a free trade agreement could be exchanged between North and South Korea for their mutual advantage. It would be a win-win, and then eventually moving to healthcare. So, okay, so the proposal is a bilateral trade agreement for agreed list of agricultural goods, and then for a joint administration as using the model of the European Coal and Steel Community, with a Korean Peninsula Authority to oversee the whole entire process and to explore possibilities for a future expansion of that agricultural community. So, or agriculture community, I should say, Korea Peninsula Agriculture Community, KPAC. Michael Schluter, who is an economist, agricultural economist, could provide us with more details about how this would work, but it would really be building on the complementarity of the two economies, not their similarities, but their differences in a way, because their differences would make complementarity work. So that South Korea, for example, could export initially agricultural machinery, plastic, sheeting, fertilizers, insecticides, fishing, and agricultural equipment. And the North Koreans would need those to modernize farming. And then in return, the North Koreans could provide a range of different items such as fish and kimchi, etc., to the South, free-range eggs, poultry, and pork. So that would be to their mutual advantage. Now, in the case of Ukraine, what we're hoping and praying for is, as I said, an armistice, which would result in the de facto partition of the area of Ukraine, which has been partially occupied by Russia. So if you look at the map, you'll see that pink section, obviously the pink, which is Russia, but then the darker pink, which was the area which Russia has been occupying first with the Crimean Peninsula and the very far east of Ukraine, and then more recently since 2022, the rest of that area, all the way down to the river, the big river, of course, the Dnipro River, which bisects the whole area of Ukraine. There were areas of blue which the Russians had occupied, which the Ukrainians pushed them back from. And while the Russians are steadily advancing, their advance is very slow and at enormous cost of lives. And so there's a huge toll being extracted for each kilometer of ground which the Russians are occupying further. So there will be a time when they will find that they have to come to a halt. And then we are left with the question, where do we go from there? So our suggestion from an RPI perspective, drawing on the insights and the methodology which we developed with respect to Ukraine, is involving three things: the rebuilding of the Kakhovka Dam, the bringing back on stream of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, and the care of the sensitive area around the lower Dnieper or Dnipro. So using the same idea that we have developed from the European coal and steel community, as well as we've been exploring in Korea, have something which can provide a common focus of cooperation, which can be built on. Now, the Kakhovka Dam was destroyed in 2023, causing widespread flooding and destruction to the area downriver from the dam. And what it be focused on is reconstructing that to prioritize and provide sustainability for that whole area, which is heavily dependent upon water because it's an agriculturally rich area, as well as supplying water to Crimea. So both sides would benefit from that. And secondly, getting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station going, which is now closed down and of course is in danger. Having a nuclear power station closed down is always very dangerous, but it could beneficially support both Russians and Ukrainians. And thirdly, the ecosystem around that whole area needs attention, so they could rebuild it again, cooperating between Russian and Ukrainian environmentalists. So this is what phase one of the MCD process would look like for the Korean Peninsula. So where in the Korean Peninsula, we've got the idea of KPAC. In the Ukrainian context, we've got the LDWEC, the Lower Dnipro Water, Energy and Environment Community, which would be built around the de facto partition, which we hope and pray comes with the ending of the fighting and the armistice. And then from there on, taking phase one into phase two, as we'll be coming in our future sessions here. with the expansion of KPAC in Korea to all goods and economic policy, and then in Ukraine to a common trade and finance area, and then phase 3, alignment of social institutions, then phase 4, confederation, linking the two de facto polities, or both in Korea, let us say, on the Peninsula, and in Russia, Ukraine, and then finally a comprehensive peace agreement, federation of oblasts in case of Ukraine, in case of Korea, a federation of provinces. So that's more or less how a mutual convergent development process worked. And just to point out the four things here. First of all, that the Korean and the Ukrainian situations are very closely interlinked. What happens in one will affect the other for better or for worse. At the moment, the Ukrainian situation is making the Korean situation worse, but we can envisage an MCD process for the two contexts, which will then provide a virtuous circle, a virtuous spiral to build peace in those two contexts.
Thank you, Jeremy. We're now just going to briefly address some of the questions that our Korean friends had sent through beforehand. And then if you've got further questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try and cover those after these. So I'll just work through, I think there are 5 questions. Just to start, going back to the idea about taking the example of what happened in post-World War II Europe as a sort of blueprint for what could be applied elsewhere. What were the ingredients that helped former enemies, France and Germany, to start working through the coal and steel community, and how might that apply in the context of Ukraine and Korea? Do you want to address that, Jeremy?
Well, yes, I think we were discussing this. It was the way in which the two leaders, Schuman and Adenauer, built up that personal relationship after the war. Schuman from the French side, the French foreign minister, and Adenauer, the Chancellor of Germany. They realized that as former enemies, they could either continue the hostility with one another, or they could rebuild the continent in a cooperative way. And they decided for the latter course. And coal and steel provided a very good way in which they could be building together, because geographically it was between Germany and France, but also they could set up complementary and mutually beneficial arrangements for both sides. And then further, they drew in Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. So I think I'd like to hand over to Michael Schluter, who has done a lot of thinking in this area, and as an economist can bring their further insights.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you for your presentation. It was all too brief, I think we all know, because there was so much ground to cover. But thank you very much for what you set out. So the way we thought about this in the Korean context was that there would be clear benefits to North and South Korea if they were able to trade with each other. In the longer term, North Korea's got huge resources of minerals, and South Korea has a range of manufactured goods that would be of great interest to North Korea. But how do you get it started? How do you begin a process of gradually moving towards a trade agreement coming into effect, which would allow North and South Koreans to start talking to each other? Because at the moment, there is no contact between North and South Korea. The benefit of a trade agreement is both sides are benefiting, and the business people on both sides need to talk to each other for arranging the exchange of goods. And there are issues as well in North and South Korea about how you manage the currency questions and Paul Mills has contributed a great deal as a former IMF economist to suggesting how the currency problems could be resolved, together with an eminent South Korean economist who was involved in those discussions. But I think what we are suggesting is that if you started with one sector, like they did with France and Germany, France and Germany concentrated on coal and steel. If in the Korean Peninsula you started the process of trade in one sector and you made that agriculture, North Korea could be selling to South Korea nuts and fish and a particular form of kimchi, which apparently the South Koreans particularly like, which comes from an area south of Pyongyang, and pork and free-range eggs. And South Korea could be exporting to North Korea improved seeds, improved strains of animals, rice and wheat and agricultural machinery, and a range of other agricultural products. So you could have an exchange going on between North and South Korea, which would be very much to their mutual advantage. So we were thinking you could start with that. How would you actually get them to initiate that discussion to explore a Korean Peninsula agriculture community? I think that's a really important question. It would probably take a year or two to negotiate it. But I think my own view is you probably need a third party who might be willing to help convene those discussions or moderate them in some way. One possible nearby country, Mongolia, might be prepared to take on that role. They have a close relationship with North Korea historically, and I think would be very acceptable to South Korea as well. So we think it is a very practical and feasible way to initiate conversations between North and South Korea if the Mongolians were to invite them to a mutually acceptable place to explore the possibilities.
Okay, I think we've explored a few questions there. We'll move on to the next one.
Can I just say, go back again, Paul, to the Ukrainian situation. So just remind people, the three elements there. I think what we want to try and get to is something which will be of mutual benefit. And it isn't of mutual benefit to the Russian and Ukrainian controlled sides of the Dnieper, that the Kakhovka Dam is in ruins, or indeed that the Zaporizhzhia power station is not running. So it's what you might call the prisoner's dilemma, that both sides need to cooperate for something which will be benefiting them both. If they don't cooperate, they both lose out. So they need to work together to find things which are of mutual benefit and common benefit to them. And this is why we're focusing in the Ukrainian sense on this idea of a LWEC idea community, which will bring together those mutual benefits.
Yeah, I think we need to work on that acronym. But
Yes,
we'll move on.
It's LLD, or it should be LDWEC. Yes.
Yeah. We need to work on something a little snappier.
Okay,
moving on. We've been asked that trust is very important in these processes. How, which of the elements that build trust, mutual knowledge, respect, and values, are the most difficult to find in a post-conflict or divided society? Sort of what's the key requirement to bring two parties together who have been fighting or in conflict in the past?
Jeremy, you can kick off with that.
I think it's finding a point of meeting, I think, is the key thing. I'm trying to get back to the key things, the three things that we need to have: mutual knowledge, mutual respect, values and goals alignment. So unless people are actually physically meeting each other, they can't build that sort of knowledge with one another. And this is what we've developed in the case of South Africa, in the case of Rwanda and Sudan, that we have those three elements brought together by allowing people to meet and share and get and share their common views one with another. So you start small, you keep you reach out to people at middle level who have access to the major players, and then you find ways to find a place of common meeting away from the press, away from the pressures which are coming from outside, allowing them to talk, keeping the discussions confidential but not secret, so that they can report back to the leading political groups to which they're in contact. And so by a process of continuing to meet as a series of consultations, building up a common picture about what is possible. So that's the process we developed in South Africa, and we did that in Rwanda as well as Sudan. And the process which we are exploring with respect to both Korea and Ukraine, Russia, as we get the ideas firmed up and as we get people involved, and as the situation provides the necessary stability in the case of Ukraine and Russia for that to be taken forward, which I think has to happen in due course.
Let me just add a comment there on the Korean situation. Before COVID so rudely interrupted our activities, we'd got quite a distance between, quite a distance towards the Mongolians initiating a conversation between North and South Korea. The Mongolians have a close relationship for historical reasons with North Korea. There's felt to be common blood ancestry between the North Koreans and the Mongolians, and they were willing to host meetings to bring together North and South Korea. I went with Benjamin Moses, who runs our Geneva office, to Mongolia and had detailed conversations with the Mongolian government about initiating those meetings between North and South Korea as a way of having a mutually acceptable third party convening the meetings. And it would be a track-2 process, it would be confidential, and it would focus initially on the agricultural sector, as we've explained, hoping to expand it once that was going beyond agriculture to a whole range of other economic goods and services. Anyway, the Mongolians were happy to host it at that time, and I think if COVID had not intervened, there's a very good chance that we would have been able to hold those meetings between the two Koreas at that time. So it's very frustrating, but we did get a long way down the road towards that, and it seems now we'd have to go right back to the beginning and make another trip to Mongolia and revisit the whole thing again. But I won't say more than that now, I think, unless anyone wants to ask a question.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. So moving on to the third question, it's sort of raised the issue of the idea of working on the dam repair for both sort of repairing the environment and the power station associated with it. And the question was, is there a special sort of aspect that working on environmental projects might be easier to bring about than economic and political ones? I don't know if Jeremy would like to comment on that.
Yes, I think, as I said, we want to get back to where we have a win-win situation for both sides. In other words, something which will mutually benefit the two elements in the conflict. In this case, the Russian-occupied areas as well as the Ukrainian-controlled areas, so that we want to find ways of mutual benefits for both sides. And that's where we identified the Kakhovka Dam which provides water, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station, which provides power, and then the environmental challenges around the lower Dnieper River. So all of those things would be a way to focus cooperation. And also then, as we discussed with the case of the European steel and coal community, and then the Korean agriculture community, there'll be a high authority which would then provide a way of building cooperation, a mechanism, a framework which could be extended into other areas. In Korea, we suggested healthcare as an area it could move into, but it could widen the whole cooperative framework and then move towards phase 2, which would be extending a common business area across the whole of that area, and then building social exchanges and so on further down the road.
So Jeremy, just to explain a little bit more on that. So if you're going to have an agricultural community, if you've got to have some body, some institution, which is overseeing how this works, how the trade works, what happens at the borders, how the goods are exchanged, what currencies are being used, all of those kinds of practicalities have to be thought about. And in the Korean context, what we were proposing was that this, quotes, high authority, which is a word that was used for the institution that was overseeing the coal and steel community in between France and Germany, but this, quotes, high authority would involve a number of people from North Korea and South Korea, and perhaps be chaired by somebody from a third country, either the UN or Mongolia or wherever it might come from, which would be regarded as a satisfactory neutral chair to the committee that would be running the practicalities of the arrangements. So we were getting right down into the nitty-gritty and the grassroots of making this happen.
Yes, that's right. So I think just it would be a forum for dialogue and exchange, and so civil servants, scientists, farmers, freedom could all be meeting together and building those contacts and connections for future cooperation.
Moving on to our fourth question. It's particularly focused on what mechanisms can we suggest to enhance cooperation between parties that have been former enemies when conflict has been deep-seated? What are the practical steps we can take to try and help former enemies find shared values? I don't know if Mike wants to start with that, or Jeremy.
I'm a great believer in the role of research kicking off some of these processes, and that was one of the reasons that we wrote that 600-page book on No Other Way to Peace in Korea, just looking at all the different parts of Korean society, looking across not just agriculture, but looking at finance, looking at business organization and administration, but also looking at healthcare and education and all the different sectors, and then examining what happens in North Korea in each of those sectors as far as we were able to get the information, but I think we did get a lot of information together. And then looking at how it works in South Korea, and then saying, well, where are the commonalities? Where actually are both Koreas already substantially on the same page? And you'd be amazed to know, and you can read it in my book if you want to get the evidence, and all with 600 footnotes and all the rest of it. But we found an extraordinary degree of convergence between North and South Korea, which maybe is not surprising given that North and South Korea have been effectively one people for 5,000 years. It's not surprising that when they come to think about education or healthcare or whatever, they do find that they are on the same page on so many things, at the level of values and objectives. So I still feel that there is enormous opportunities for getting committees to meet involving North and South Koreans in each of these sectors to say, all right, what would we need to do to bring these two, our institutions and our policy goals, as well as our values, into total alignment, for example, in education or in healthcare or in other sectors. Now, I can see my friends on this call, Ian and Helen Wells, and they know much, much more about the healthcare sector than I will ever know. But after discussions with them in past days, and just talking to them about their experience of teaching North Koreans through PUST and other things, it did become clear to me that there is great potential for alignment of objectives between the North and South Koreans if they could only start to meet and talk and discuss how they could bring their healthcare systems or their education systems together. So I remain an optimist about what's possible about reunification of the Korean Peninsula. I know at the moment it seems very improbable given North Korea's alignment with Russia and so on, and South Korea's alignment with the US, and the fact that their international allies are so in conflict. But I think if the Koreans could somehow step away from the Russian-American alignments on either side and actually start to talk to one another, they would find the possibility of re-establishing a shared Korea, which would then be able to negotiate with Russia or China or the US or whoever externally is very strong. But it would need to be, as we've argued in our books and papers, probably a 5-stage process in order to get there. It wouldn't happen in one. It can't happen in one shot, as it were. You need to go through a process of starting maybe in one sector, agriculture, but moving on to education and healthcare, and an exchange of students, exchange of social events and other things to gradually build contacts and opportunities for North and South Koreans to meet and talk to one another, and then start to build a groundswell of understanding of the possibilities and optimism about the future.
Anything you'd like to add, Jeremy?
Well, I think, as I say, the two contexts are very closely interlinked, and if we can find some way of getting some mileage with the Ukraine-Russia situation, that would also help to open things up on the Korean Peninsula. So whereas at the moment they're negatively affecting each other, this would turn the whole thing on its head and provide a good example of how a mutual convergent development process can work in different contexts of conflict across the divides. And the whole geopolitics of it could be seen as building something rather than undermining something.
And finally, a question particularly focused on sort of the economic realities. We're sort of talking about economic cooperation without full integration, but when the two societies, particularly on the Korean Peninsula, operate with very different economic systems, how can we bring about some degree of collaboration without sort of similar economic model? In contrast, post-war Europe had market economies, and that helped with the process of integration. I'll kick off a little bit on this. In that,
good.
yes,
I was hoping that we could get you to say something on that, Paul. Come on.
Yes, Paul hides his economic light under a bushel.
Acknowledging that it would be very difficult to begin this process, but you can start with sort of basic exchanges, basic interactions, and then build it up from there. So if people are interested, as Michael mentioned, a couple of years ago, I and a fellow South Korean economist developed an idea for how to move from a barter system that you could use with agriculture. You'd agree on terms of trade for an exchange, and then build it up to some form of currency agreement between the central banks of North and South, whereby they would have to trust each other and maybe post collateral, post security that would be used as a means of facilitating credit or exchange between the two central banks, that then can be used as a means to facilitate wider exchange than just barter on agreed terms. And so you gradually build up economic processes whereby you could facilitate wider trade than just agreeing barter terms. But that might be the first thing you have to do. Just establish a quality assured price for two goods that you then exchange at the border and build it up from there. But yes, the more you develop, you have to have agreements on dispute resolution, quality assurance, maybe some form of legal process where you can agree contract terms. How do you enforce foreclosure on bad debts, or how do you quality assure the delivery of, assure the quality of goods and then delivery of promises going forward and so on. So the more sophisticated the exchanges become, the more detail you need to agree on how do you cope with the contractual issues going forward. But yes, it's one of starting small and simple and then gradually building up complexity as cooperation improves.
I think the underlying problem, Paul, that you just need to mention is that if you're wanting to trade goods between North and South Korea, South Korean goods are exchangeable because the currency is tradable in international financial markets. So you can establish the value of a South Korean won through reference to the dollar, the pound, or any other, the euro, any other currency. The problem with North Korean goods is that they're not, the North Korean won is not exchangeable freely with any other currency. You can't, what is the value of a North Korean won in terms of dollars or euros or any other currency? So that makes trading very difficult because you haven't got a way of valuing North Korean goods that would be acceptable to the South Koreans. So there is an initial problem of getting that trade going. And those were the problems that you were trying to solve with the eminent South Korean economists to find a way to do that.
Yeah, so you can do that through barter, but you have to agree the quality of the goods you're
so clumsy though, isn't it?
So, yeah. But then you can sort of you need agreement and trust between central banks. You might need them to be posting collateral in goods or commodities such as gold that are mutually valued. And so therefore you can find some degree of value and security that can be used as a foundation to help exchange.
So where were we with the list of questions?
So sorry, we've finished the 5 that have been submitted.
I think we covered.
We don't have anything in the chat at the moment, but if people have further questions, either write them in the chat or we can you can speak now and we'll try and answer them. If anyone has anything to add or to ask.
While people are thinking, Paul, Mr. Chair, can I just mention our next sessions that we're going to be having once on a monthly basis? As you saw, we we set out the different phases that there are, looking at the way in which the phase 1 would lead into phase 2, which was the extension of an economic area across both, well, in the various cases of Korean Peninsula and then the Ukraine area, and then moving towards exchange of social activities, and then building a confederation, and finally a federation of oblasts or provinces. So at each webinar, we'll be dealing with one of those phases. The next webinar is scheduled for next month. It'll be the 24th of June at noon, as now. And so please, if you'd like to join us, you're very welcome. I've also got a handout, which anybody who'd like to see it, the handout of the slides that were presented today, which you'd be very welcome to have if you indicate you'd like to receive it.
Okay. I don't think I see anyone with hands up to ask questions or anything further in the chat. So unless Michael or Jeremy have anything further to say.
I just want to thank everybody who came on the call today, and it's we're grateful for your interest. This encourages us, and it's nice to see one or two other people on the call who I recognize from the past. So thank you all for coming, and look forward to future contact and discussion.
And do go onto the website, which is www.relationalpeacebuilding.org, and please do get the book, which is available in South Korean. Young Gil may be able to provide more details about that. Young Gil? He's not there.
All right.
Where is he?
In the meantime, we do have a question from Oliver Ive. I don't know.
Oh,
Jeremy,
my brother.
if that's
My brother.
your brother.
Hello.
So just to say, he says, besides politics and economic issues, surely there needs to be credible leadership. And so I don't know whether you want to just comment on that in terms of both Russia, Ukraine, and the Korean Peninsula.
Yes, I'd agree with my brother on that one. Obviously, the leadership on both sides would need to be tested and under proper scrutiny from both sides. There has to, and we must be honest, there's a certain issue of corruption and nepotism which has blighted the economies of Russia and Ukraine, and those are areas of reform which have to be dealt with. There has to be accountability. There has to be a proper network and a proper way of making sure that all monies put in are fully accounted for and used according to the purpose intended, and moreover that the clear objectives are set and that there's a measure against which those objectives are adjudicated in order to make sure that things are done properly. I think that is all part of the process.
Okay,
Young Gil's
Jeremy,
come back.
I'm back. Yeah, I was translating in typewriting. So
okay.
yeah, I've been following your presentation and discussions. Thank you so very much. So let me talk to Korean participants about the translation available in both languages, in South Korean language and North Korean on the website. 지금 요 잠깐 제가 한국말로 말씀드리면은 이제 relationalpeacebuilding.org에 가시면은 그게 이제 지금 RPI 웹사이트거든요. 지금 마이클 슐루터가 No Other Way to Unification 이런 제목으로 500페이지짜리 책을 썼어요. 엄청 두꺼운 책인데 코비드 기간 동안에 그 책을 썼고요. 근데 그게 이제 한국어로도 번역되고 또 이제 북한에서 오신 분이 북한어로다가 다시 감수를 해서 북한어 버전도 있습니다. 그래서 거기 올라가시면은 사지 않고 아마 다운로드도 받을 수 있게 됐을 겁니다. 그 참고로 말씀드리겠습니다. 한반도 미래를 유럽식 관점에서 바라본 상당히 대표적인 작품 중에 하나로 생각하시면 될 것 같습니다. 오케이, thank you.
감사합니다.
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 Okay, thank you very much, Ngili.
Thank you. Yeah.
If there's no other contributions, I'll thank Jeremy in particular for his presentation and Michael for his insights, and everyone for their participation. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Paul.
안녕하세요.
Thank you. Blessings. Thank you.
Thank you
Michael,
so much.
Jeremy.
감사합니다.
Yeah, and
Thank you
all.
very
Thank you so much. 감사합니다.
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 thank you very
Right.
much. Okay.
Bless you. Bye-bye.
Bless.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Should we? Yep. Sign off? I think so.